There is a specific moment when a wild bird decides that your yard is no longer just a place it passes through, but a place it lives. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a sound or a sign. It happens quietly, somewhere between the 3rd and the 30th visit, in a second so small that most people who have witnessed it never realize what they were watching. But it is real. It is measurable. It is, in fact, one of the most thoroughly studied behaviors in the entire field of urban ornithology. Once you know what to look for, you will never watch a bird in your yard the same way again, because the birds that decide your yard is home don't just come back more often. They don't just eat more seed. They change in their posture, in their movements, in their relationship to you and to the other birds and to the trees, shrubs, and feeders you provided, without ever really knowing what you were offering. They become residents. And residents behave differently from visitors in ways that are as specific and measurable as any biological trait we can name. Today, we're going to name them. Welcome back to the soul of a bird. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to learn will change the way you understand every bird that visits your yard. In this video, we're going through 9 specific signals, 9 observable behaviors that indicate, with scientific precision and remarkable consistency across species, that a wild bird has made the decision that your yard is its home. Not just its feeding stop, not just its occasional landing place. It is home. These signals are subtle. Most people miss them completely. But once you know what you're looking for, you will start seeing them in your yard. And you will finally understand which birds have simply passed through and which ones have chosen, in their own wild and careful way, to stay. Stay until the end, because the 9th signal, the one almost nobody talks about, reveals something about your yard that most backyard birders never fully grasp. And it changes everything about how you think about the birds that visit you. The first signal is they stop performing the full safety scan before landing. This is the first signal, and it is the one almost nobody notices, because by the time you can observe it, the bird has already made its decision. Every wild bird, when approaching a new location, performs what ornithologists call a pre-landing assessment. The bird pauses on a perch somewhere in the vicinity of the intended landing site, a branch, a fence, a distant tree, and scans. Its eyes move in a specific pattern. Its head turns in deliberate increments. The bird is checking for predators, for other dominant birds, for movement, for any of dozens of environmental signals that might indicate danger. This scan typically takes between 3 and 15 seconds, depending on the species. Cardinals, among the most cautious common backyard birds, often take closer to 15 seconds. Chickadees, which are bolder, can complete the scan in under 5. But every bird does it every time, without exception, until the moment they decide the place is home. Once a bird has classified a location as its resident territory, the pre-landing scan is dramatically reduced. It may become a single quick turn of the head rather than a full sweep. It may disappear entirely, replaced by a direct approach and a confident landing that tells you, if you know what to watch for, that this bird is no longer evaluating this place. It has already concluded the evaluation. The cardinal that used to pause on the fence post for 15 seconds before coming to the feeder now flies directly from the shrub to the perch without stopping. The chickadee that used to make 3 separate approaches moves now arrives in a single direct flight. The nuthatch that used to check the angle of every tree branch now lands on the feeder the way you land in your own kitchen chair. This change from cautious, sequential approach to direct, confident landing is the first behavioral signature of a bird that has accepted your yard as home. It is, in the scientific literature, one of the most reliable single indicators of habituation to a specific territory. And it happens so gradually over so many visits that most people simply never notice the shift. But the shift is there. Once you start watching for it, you will see it in real time. A bird that used to hesitate is now committing. And that commitment is, in bird terms, something very close to what we would call trust. The second signal, they return at the same time, day after day. Time is one of the most underappreciated dimensions of bird behavior. But for birds that have selected a territory as their permanent range, time becomes structured in ways that are almost shocking in their precision. Wild birds have what researchers call circadian feeding windows, narrow periods of the day specific to each individual, when they preferentially forage at their most reliable food sources. In studies tracking individual birds with tiny identification bands, researchers have documented that birds returning to familiar feeders arrive at the same time each day, often within a window of 5 to 10 minutes of the previous day's visit. Not approximately, not roughly, within a 10-minute window, day after day after day. The chickadee that comes to your feeder at 7:18 this morning came at 7:12 yesterday and will come at 7:15 tomorrow. Not because of any external cue, not the sunrise, not the temperature, not the presence of seed, but because it has incorporated this specific location into its internal schedule. The feeder has become a fixed point in a circadian map that is, for that bird, as real and unchangeable as the geography of your house is for you. The most remarkable thing about this behavior is how quickly it establishes itself and how long it persists. A bird that has visited a feeder for as few as 2 weeks will often begin showing this time-locked pattern. And once established, the pattern continues even through significant disturbances, through weather, through predator events, through temporary absences. If the birds in your yard arrive at predictable times, at intervals, you could set a watch by if you can say with confidence that the cardinal will be at the fence post within 5 minutes of 7:30 every morning. Every season, you are looking at birds that have made your yard part of their daily structure. Their internal clock is calibrated to your location. They are home. And here is the part that matters most. This kind of temporal regularity requires the bird to prioritize your yard over every other location available in its range. At 7:30 in the morning, your yard is the most important place in that bird's world. It arrives at exactly that time because your yard has won its reliability assessment over every alternative it ever considered. That is not a small achievement for a backyard. That is the bird telling you, in the language of its own behavior, that your yard is the one it chose. The third signal, they sing from specific perches, and only from those. For songbirds, song is territory. The male cardinal that perches on the highest branch of the maple tree in your yard and sings at dawn is not singing for pleasure. He is not singing for your benefit. He is announcing to every other male cardinal within hearing distance that this specific geographic area is his to defend, his to provide for a mate, his to raise young. The song itself is important, but the location of the song is even more important. Research on songbird territoriality has documented that birds which have fully established a territory will sing from specific repeated perches, often the same 3 to 5 locations across the boundary of their claimed area. These perches are chosen with extraordinary precision. They are elevated enough to project sound effectively. They offer good sight lines to detect approaching rivals. And they sit at the physical edges of the territory being claimed. When you notice that the male cardinal in your yard sings from the same branch of the same tree every morning, you are not watching a random behavior. You are watching a bird that has drawn, in its mind, the specific borders of a territory that includes your yard. The perch is a landmark on its internal map. Its song from that perch is the announcement that it owns the ground beneath it. And here is what matters most. Birds only establish these singing perches within territories they have accepted as permanent. A bird that is merely passing through will not invest the energy required to sing from an elevated position. A bird that is still evaluating an area will sing sporadically and from varied locations. But a bird that has committed to a territory, a bird that has decided this is where it will live, mate, and defend, will return to the same high perches, the same exact branches, day after day, through every season of song. Look for this pattern in your yard. Is there a specific branch where the cardinal always sings? A specific roof peak where the mockingbird performs at dusk? A specific wire where the sparrow calls at midday? If so, you are not just hearing birdsong. You are hearing the audible declaration of ownership. And that ownership is an act of commitment. The bird has fully permanently accepted your yard as its own. The fourth signal, they begin to cache food in specific locations across your property. This is one of the most extraordinary behaviors to witness once you know what to look for. And it is one of the clearest indicators of a bird that is fully committed to your yard as home. Many species, particularly chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, jays, and woodpeckers, engage in food caching, hiding food items in specific locations for retrieval later. But there is a critical distinction that most backyard birders miss. Caching requires long-term spatial memory of a territory. A bird does not cache food in a location it does not intend to remember. Research from the University of Vermont on black-capped chickadee caching behavior has documented that individual chickadees maintain mental maps of up to several hundred cache locations simultaneously. Each one remembered in detail, each one revisited at predictable intervals, each one located within a territory the bird has claimed as its own. And here is what makes this behavior so meaningful as a signal of home. Chickadees will not cache food in a yard they do not intend to return to. The cost of caching, the energy spent hiding the food, the risk of forgetting the location, the danger of having a cache raided by another bird is only paid when the bird is confident it will be in that location to benefit from the investment. A chickadee that takes a sunflower seed from your feeder and carries it to a specific crack in a specific piece of bark on a specific tree in your yard is telling you in the most unambiguous possible way that this is her territory. She expects to be here next week. She expects to be here next month. She is making an investment in the future of this location because she has decided with the full weight of her cognitive and metabolic resources that this location is her home. Watch for this. A chickadee that grabs a seed and disappears for a few seconds before returning is almost certainly caching. A nuthatch that presses a seed into the bark of your oak tree is caching. A blue jay that flies off with a whole peanut and comes back empty-beaked has buried or wedged that peanut somewhere within what it considers its home territory, somewhere it fully expects to retrieve it. Every act of caching in your yard is a wild bird signing its name to the deed. This is mine. I will return for what I have hidden here. This place is part of me. The fifth signal they continue to visit during off-peak seasons. The true test of whether a bird considers your yard home is whether it stays when conditions would justify leaving. Every backyard birder knows that feeder activity peaks in the coldest months of winter and drops significantly in late spring and summer, when natural food becomes abundant. This is a normal pattern. Birds take advantage of the easier, more nutritious food that warmer seasons provide, and they reduce their reliance on feeder resources accordingly. But there is a specific difference in behavior between birds that simply use your feeder seasonally and birds that have made your yard their permanent home. Seasonal visitors disappear from your yard almost entirely during off-peak periods. They show up in November when the first frost reduces natural food. They vanish by April when the insects emerge. You don't see them again until the following autumn. These are birds that consider your yard part of their larger foraging range, useful when needed, irrelevant when not. Resident birds, by contrast, never fully disappear. They may be less visible during abundant seasons. Their visits may be shorter and less frequent, but they remain because your yard is not just a food source to them. It is the physical center of their world. A cardinal that sings from the maple tree in May is a resident. A chickadee that nests in a nest box in June is a resident. A nuthatch that works the oak trunk in July is a resident. These are not birds using your yard as a convenience. These are birds living in your yard as their territory, and they will be there whether you fill the feeder today or not. The test is simple. Watch your yard in the most abundant months, late May through July, when your feeder is probably at its quietest. Are there still specific individual birds that appear reliably, even briefly, every few days? Yes, those are your residents. Those are the ones who chose your yard not for what it provides in scarcity, but for what it represents as geography, the specific place on the earth they have claimed as home. The sixth signal, they respond to your voice and your routine. This is the one that will change how you understand your relationship with the birds in your yard forever. Research on urban bird cognition, particularly studies on chickadees, corvids, and several species of finches, has documented that resident birds develop specific individualized responses to the humans who share their territory. These responses go far beyond simple recognition. They involve the bird incorporating specific humans into its mental model of the environment. You become, to a resident bird, a predictable feature of its territory. Your voice, your footsteps, the sound of your back door opening, the particular way you walk through the yard. All of these become encoded in the bird's daily life. The bird knows the difference between the sound of your car arriving and the sound of a stranger's car. It knows the difference between you walking to the feeder and you walking past the feeder. It knows when you're going to stop and watch and when you're just moving through, and it adjusts its behavior accordingly. A resident bird may continue feeding when you come outside, not because it has suddenly become unafraid of humans, but because it has specifically assessed you as non-threatening. The same bird in the same yard will flush dramatically when a stranger approaches. This is not coincidence, not tameness. This is individualized recognition and response, calibrated to specific humans who have been part of that bird's territory long enough to be categorized. The chickadee that waits on the branch for you to fill the feeder before coming down is a resident. The cardinal that appears on the fence when you open the back door is a resident. The nuthatch that continues its work on the oak trunk when you walk past is a resident. The robin that tilts its head as you step onto the porch in the morning is a resident. These birds are not responding to your presence. They are responding to you specifically, as an individual they have classified through repeated observation. And the fact that they have taken the time to develop that classification is the clearest possible indicator that they expect to be in your yard long enough. The seventh signal, they participate in coordinated alarm responses with other birds in your yard. This is where things get truly remarkable, and where the idea of your yard as home takes on a dimension that most backyard birders never fully consider. Resident birds don't just live in a territory, they form social networks within that territory, and those social networks extend across species, forming what researchers call mixed species flocks. In most North American backyards, mixed species flocks form around core nuclear species, most commonly black-capped chickadees, whose alarm calls are understood by almost every other small bird species. When the chickadees call, the titmice respond, the nuthatches respond, the downy woodpeckers respond. The cardinals, finches, and sparrows all hear the signal and react accordingly. But here is the critical detail. These coordinated responses only happen between birds that share the same territory long enough to develop a common vocabulary. A bird passing through an unfamiliar yard does not know how to interpret the alarm calls of the local chickadees. It cannot tell the difference between a high-threat alarm and a low-threat contact call. It doesn't know which local sounds indicate a hawk, which indicate a cat, and which simply indicate another chickadee moving branches. Resident birds do know. They have learned, through extended coexistence, the specific communication patterns of the other birds in their shared territory. They respond to each other's signals with precision. They form, essentially, a community. Watch for this in your yard. When a chickadee gives an alarm call, do the other birds respond in unison? Does a certain call from a cardinal cause the nuthatches to stop feeding? Does a specific sound from a blue jay make the smaller birds cover? If so, you are not looking at isolated individual birds using the same feeder. You are looking at a social community, a community that is formed in your yard, whose members have chosen your yard as the shared territory in which they will live their lives. That community is, in every meaningful sense, evidence that your yard has become home to an entire network of wild creatures. Not just one or two, but a functioning ecological society. The eighth signal, they bring their young to your yard. This one requires patience to witness, but once you do, you will never forget it. The moment a bird brings its newly fledged young to your yard is the moment that yard has been definitively certified as home. Bird parents do not take fledglings, the most vulnerable stage of a bird's life, to unfamiliar tracts of land. The stakes are too high. A predator encounter in an unknown area can end an entire breeding season's investment in a single failed moment. So when the fledglings come, it is because the parents have assessed your yard across every possible dimension as safe. The cover is adequate. The food is reliable. The predator pressure is known and manageable. The humans are predictable. The other birds in the community are familiar. You will know when this happens. The signs are unmistakable. A fledgling cardinal is larger than you might expect, nearly adult-sized by the time it leaves the nest, but its plumage is muted and duller than the parents, and it flutters its wings awkwardly while begging for food with an open beak. You will see it perched on a lower branch, often in the middle of the yard rather than at the edge, while a parent cardinal brings it food from the feeder. A fledgling chickadee is smaller and fluffier than the adults, and its begging calls are higher and more persistent. A fledgling robin is almost comically speckled, its breast covered in dark spots that will fade as it matures into the familiar orange-red of the adult. A fledgling blue jay has a distinct gray wash to its plumage that disappears within a few weeks. The parents are showing the young bird the specific geography of the territory, the safe perches, the reliable food sources, the water, the cover. They are quite literally teaching the fledgling where home is, and they have selected your yard as the place where this first, most critical education happens. If a wild bird has brought its young to your yard even once, even briefly, you are looking at the ultimate expression of a bird's commitment to a territory. This is the next generation being introduced to the place where, if everything goes well, they too will eventually live and sing and raise their own young. That is not a yard. That is a lineage of birds spanning generations, anchored to the land you tend. The ninth signal, they die in your yard or near it because they refuse to leave. I saved this one for last because it is the one almost nobody discusses, and it reveals the deepest truth about what home means to a wild bird. Resident birds, when they reach the end of their lives, do not wander off to die in some distant and unfamiliar place. They die within their territories, often within a very small radius of the core area they have claimed. Research on avian mortality in urban environments has documented that resident birds overwhelmingly die within the same territory they occupied as adults, frequently within meters of the perches they used most often in life. This is not sentimental anthropomorphism. It is documented fact. Birds, like most territorial animals, have a profound and ultimately irreversible attachment to their home range. When they become ill or aged or injured, their instinctive response is not to leave. It is to stay, to seek the familiar cover of the territory they know, to die within the bounds of the place they spent their life defending, provisioning, and knowing in detail. If you have ever found a bird's body in your yard, particularly a bird that showed signs of being a resident rather than a casualty of a predator or a window strike, you are looking at the final confirmation that your yard was the center of that bird's world. It did not choose to leave your territory, even in death. It did not seek some other place to end. It died where it lived, because the two had become, in its understanding, the same. This is the deepest meaning of what it is to have birds that call your yard home. They come. They stay. They sing from your trees. They cache food in your bark. They bring their young to your branches. And at the end of their lives, they remain, because your yard is not just a place to them. It is the only place that matters. You may not have realized it until now. But if you have been tending a yard, filling a feeder, maintaining a bird bath, keeping the trees healthy, providing cover, you have been building something much larger than a garden. You have been building a home for creatures whose entire existence is anchored to specific pieces of land. The birds in your yard are not customers. They are not visitors. They are not beneficiaries of your charity. The ones who have stayed are residents of a territory they have selected from among all the yards in your neighborhood and all the yards in your region and all the places in the world available to them. They looked at your specific yard. They assessed it across every dimension of what wild birds need, and they chose to build their entire lives there. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, one of the most remarkable gifts a human being can receive from the natural world, the decision by creatures with no obligation to us, whose entire existence predates our species by tens of millions of years, to make our small patch of land part of their home. The signals are there. The specific moment when each bird made the decision is there. You just have to know what to look for. And now you do. Have you ever watched one of these signals happen in your own yard? Have you seen a bird stop pausing before it lands, or sing from the same branch every morning, or bring its young to your feeder? Tell me in the comments. These are the stories I read and carry with me the longest, because every one of them is evidence of a bird that looked at all the options available and chose someone specifically to share its home with. I'll see you in the next one.